What's the stupidest thing you have ever said in a classroom? Teacher, addressing the class, you need to stop leaving the school grounds at lunchtime to go to the supermarket. Teacher, we know every time you go and who's going. Me, well you didn't notice when I went. We were learning about diseases and their effects on the body in biology class. From a list of about 20, I noticed AIDS reduces white blood cells and hepatitis C increases white blood cells. You can probably guess what I asked. Teacher said it was a dumb question, didn't answer it, and I was laughed out of the room. Well, a few years later I found out that hepatitis C is being researched to help cure AIDS. Everyone was assigned a country and had to give a presentation about it. One girl was assigned an African country, can't remember which. She kept referring to the people as African Americans. After her presentation the teacher had to explain that Africans living in Africa were not African Americans. In 4th grade, we were watching a film. I must have dozed off slightly because out of the blue, for no reason at all, I suddenly blurt out "do-what?" Said blurt lasted about a second and a half. It was like the needle on the record, scratched, and everyone turned to look at me. I looked around trying to pass it off like someone else did it, but it was too late. My face was so hot you could cook an egg on it. When I was in the 6th grade the teacher called on me while I wasn't paying attention. I think the question was something like, what makes the earth orbit the sun? A classmate whispered opera to me while I blanked out, so that's the answer I gave her. Opera makes the world go round. Oh, I got a great one. So back in 2nd grade, we were learning about how to use commas. At the same time, the girls in my class were telling me how they found a condom in the toilet. I have no idea, and I'm only just realizing how creepy that is. Anyway, I, being an innocent child, had no idea what it was, and they went ahead and explained it to me. Needless to say, I did not understand a single thing they said. Fast forward to probably like a day or two later, and we were doing review on punctuation. My teacher asked a question, and the answer to the question was a comma. However, no one was getting the answer, and I really wanted to be right. Eventually, I did think of the correct answer, but instead of a comma, I yelled out a condom. My teacher just stared at me and then pretended she didn't hear me. Despite, the fact that I yelled loud enough for the adjacent rooms to hear me. I went to answer a question in 4th grade. I knew the answer, but as soon as the teacher called on me I forgot. So I said the following lines. I know the answer, but it kinda went from the front of my brain to the back of my brain and I don't know it anymore. That happens sometimes. I don't think my teacher knew what to say, so she called on someone else, and they knew the answer. That memory still haunts me from time to time. This used to happen in my 8th grade science class all the time. Every time a student forgot the answer the second they got called on, our teacher would tell them to stand up and then sit back down, and they'll remember 9/10 times it worked. This teacher would also let us sit on top of the desks, as long as we weren't blocking someone's view, or go stand in the back of the classroom, because she believed that sitting in the same spot for too long decreased your ability to learn. Oh, and she was one of the only teachers who actively let us chew gum, because the act of chewing helped keep you focused on the lecture, and she had a scrap paper basket for you to wrap your gum in before throwing it out. Ms. Davis was one of the best teachers ever. She had a son who was in the same grade as us, but went to a different school, so she knew exactly how our brains worked. I miss her. So, when I was in 3rd grade, this one episode of SpongeBob had just come out where at the beginning the narrator says BC. Before comedy. I'm in class one day, and we are talking about history in the times of BC and such. My teacher asks, can anyone tell me what BC stands for? And I raised my hand and said before comedy. My teacher gave me the most confused look that made me feel so stupid after that. Not mine, but once in geography, the teacher said, if we looked in our blazers we'd see where it was made. My friend then proceeded to say, Miss, is polyester a country? I was in a class last year and got asked to describe myself, but was the first to do so. I said I liked Mac-Open clothes and everyone else talked about amazing things like volunteering, traveling, working at their jobs. And I said the most vague possible. 4th or 5th grade. The teacher was discussing the Big Bang. I was half paying attention, but I heard her say Big Bang and raised my hand. I remember that. When it happened, it scared me so much I fell off the couch. She stared at me blankly for a moment while the other kids laughed. Fortunately, I think they all thought I was making a joke. However, I stupidly associated Big Bang with an actual explosion that happened at a nearby refinery earlier that year, which for whatever reason I assumed she was talking about. Australian here. There was a question once of what's the capital of Australia. For some reason I said Canada. I was 8 and it still haunts me. Not me, but a kid in my college class. Someone in the previous class left his baseball hat on the desk in front row. The professor picks it up and says, "Does anyone recognize this?" This doofus raises his hand and says in all seriousness, "I think it's a hat." I laughed so hard I almost pissed myself. In HS, me and my friends would play a game of who would get kicked out of class first. I always won during history class. When the teacher was speaking about Charles de Gaulle, I'd always ask her to specify the man or the ship, Laporte, the man or the bridge. Basically anywhere the question, although very stupid, would be appropriate. By the end of the year, I would raise my hand and immediately hear "Get out." I was eating my ham sandwiches during English class. The teacher noticed, thought it was chewing gum, and told me to toss it in the bin. Didn't even consider to barf out a bowl of chewed ham sandwiches, so with a mouthful I mumbled, "It's okay, I swallow." The entire class lost it. My teacher used to walk around and check that the students had completed the homework from the night before. One time I managed to get out a difficult maths problem, and he said, "Well done, James. Go to the top of the class." So I did. Walked up to the top of the classroom and then called out his name and asked what I was meant to do in front of everyone. It was pretty much a point and laugh situation after that. I was about 14. Typical high school blonde. I would laugh it off now, but I was super embarrassed back then. Biology teacher sent me to get a pair of those plastic brain models from another classroom that was full and being lectured, so I'd have everyone's attention. Right before I entered, I stopped and realized I'd look like an idiot to barge in and ask for brains. I thought carefully about my question, then entered and asked I'd like to borrow something for Mr. Smith's class from that closet, ma'am. Teacher, well, what did he tell you to get me? Brains. Door. In 5th grade I missed a couple of weeks of school because I had surgery. At the time I was still very serious about my education. Doing poorly in school horrified me. In hindsight I wouldn't even say I was a nerd. Nerds are smart. I've just always been anxious and self-loathing, and so I always came off as an insufferable tryhard. Because I was. Anyway, I'm sitting in science class and the teacher is talking about seismic waves. I was like, "That's awesome. Tell me more." I don't remember exactly what the lesson was, but at some point I became too confused to let the class proceed. I raised my hand. "So what happens when these waves crash? Where does all the water go?" Well, I mean, if the waves are that strong, surely it must go somewhere. No? Is it just me? Waves. Waves. These are big waves, are they not? They must flood wherever they hit. Yeah. In hindsight I don't know why the teacher didn't correct my pretty obvious error. She and the rest of the class just looked horrified and remained silent. I didn't realize my mistake for weeks. Probably not the dumbest, but it stuck in my memory. I was learning English at the time. It's my second language and I must have been around 13. I had to read a paragraph in class. The word skyscrapers appeared, and I've never seen it before. Without hesitation or thinking much about it, I read it to the effect of skyscrapers and continued without missing a beat. The rest of class, including the teacher, thought I was joking and burst out laughing. So, no embarrassment by sheer luck and confidence. Corners of a triangle does not always add up to 180 degrees. My proof turned out to be caused by a wonky ruler. I did get 181. Also the first lesson about the difference between ideal and real, that no measurement is ever perfectly accurate. I was homeschooled for 8th grade in the Bible Belt. I went back to public school in 9th grade. In my history class, we talked about the Civil War and how the main issue was slavery. Me, being an ex-homeschooler, explained to my teacher in the class how I had been taught that the Civil War began because the North was imposing high tariffs on imported goods that the South relied on. I was taught the Civil War was fought over tariffs and slavery wasn't a factor at all until the very end, so Lincoln could get good publicity. I still cringe to this day. I talked with the daughter, 4 years older than me, of a family friend who was also homeschooled. She was taught the exact same thing and had the same embarrassing moment when she went back to public school. My friends and I would play who could eat the most ridiculous snack without getting noticed in my 9th grade history class. The teacher was one of the few who let you snack in class, but he was also the type to mess around and F with you if you did something ridiculous. That's why we wanted to eat ridiculous snacks. I ate spaghetti, yogurt, cereal, and other random things. But I wouldn't get noticed until he took away our desks. Long story. So I was sitting up front with no desk and my friend gives me a McMuffin to eat. Note, it was 2:30 in the afternoon and this was before McDonald's served breakfast all day. So the only way to have this item is to have gotten it around 7:30 am. I'm eating it, and halfway through the sandwich he sees and stops in the middle of his lecture and goes, "True Russia, are you stoned?" Because it was entirely ridiculous to be eating a McMuffin at 2:30 p.m. This then prompted the teacher and I having to explain to another student what stoned meant. And then the teacher made me run laps around the hallway because I had too much energy and I'd finished all my work and wouldn't shut up. Love that man. I have so many stories about Coach Simmons. He was the best. He always said that if he won the lottery he wouldn't quit his job, but instead spent his funds on getting stadium seating in his classroom.